And we can begin whenever you're ready, Madam Chair.
Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Pierce County Council's Monday study session. Today is August 3rd, 2026. The time is 11:02 according to the clock in here. And we have our regular study session agenda. Are there any changes up front or anything? And for the record, most members are present. We are expecting Councilmember Morrell, because I'll say his name and then he usually appears. But everybody else is here. We'll review when he gets here. We're going to go to item number 2, and Mr. Taylor is filling in today admirably for Ms. Long. So Mr. Taylor, will have you kick us off.
All right, thank you. So I will review your August 4th, 2026 council meeting agenda. So this is a regular meeting here in council chambers at 3 o'clock. On your consent agenda, one item to highlight, and that's a resolution shown in shading on consent section 5. This is for introduction and scheduling. It's a resolution number R 2026-177. This is a resolution of the council affirming Pierce County's support for continued entheogen-related research for alternative treatment modalities. It requests that investigation, arrest, and prosecution of individuals engaged in related activities be the lowest law enforcement priority, and it affirms support for full decriminalization of the activities. That's being referred to the Public Safety Committee with a final council hearing date proposed of September the 1st. On your consent agenda for final action are several appointments. So you have proposal number R 2026-175. This is a resolution confirming the appointment of 3 new members to the Development and Disabilities Advisory Board. In addition, you have proposal number R 2026-176. This is a resolution confirming the appointment of 1 new member to the Pierce County Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission. Moving on to subsection D, action on grant applications and awards. There are 2 grants listed that will be discussed today, or grant applications listed that will be discussed today at study session. Those are the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Youth Homeless Systems Improvement Grant requested by Human Services Department, and second grant is the Washington State Department of Transportation Local Bridge Program grant being requested by the Planning and Public Works Department. Under section C, messages from the executive, you'll see noted that the executive has signed ordinance number O 2026-528. This is an ordinance that grants a non-exclusive franchise to Easy Fiber Texas LLC. Under section 7, proclamations, recognitions, awards, and presentations, there is 1 proclamation. This is a proclamation of the Pierce County Council and Executive designating July 31st through August the 6th as Paddle to Nisqually Week in Pierce County, Washington. You have no resolutions listed on the agenda for final action. You do have 2 ordinances listed, however. So under section 9 ordinances, you have proposal number O 2026-526S2. This is an ordinance adopting amendments to the development regulations and comprehensive plan related implementation for renewable and distributed energy systems, including battery energy support system facilities, commonly referred to as BESS. This was continued from your July 21st council meeting. I do know that there's 4 amendments that are in your packet for this proposal. Mr. Kruger will run through those in a moment. Actually, you want to pause now and have him do it, or do you want to wait until... We'll wait until I get to the agenda. Okay, sounds good. Thank you. So then the second proposed ordinance is proposal number O 2026-534. This is an ordinance amending chapter 9.57 of the Pierce County Code, endangerment with a controlled substance, regarding applicability and penalty for violations. That proposal was reviewed at your your Public Safety Committee on June 22nd. It did receive a due pass recommendation. There are 2 amendments to that proposal proposed that Ms. Kelly will brief on in a moment. And those are the items for your council agenda for August the 4th, 2026. Thank you.
Thank you. So Other than the two items that we'll talk about in detail, and we'll go over the grants, is there any other questions on the agenda for tomorrow? I think most of the questions will be those three items, but just in case. Not seeing any, so we will start with amendments. And Mr. Kruger, you are listed first, so we'll start with you.
There are four amendments, to this battery energy storage systems legislation. I plan to go through them fairly detailed because the amendments create quite a difference in terms of what they would do versus the underlying legislation. So the first item on amendment number 1 changes the description of the battery energy storage system facilities based upon size of the systems. And if you look at the amendment memo, you can see that the 2 megawatt threshold breaks into 3 categories. So this was discussed at committee as well as council, but as proposed going forward, the 2 megawatt batteries and smaller would be considered level 1. There would be a new category of batteries between 2 megawatts and 5 megawatts. And then there's the utility scale batteries, which in this proposal would start at the level of 5 megawatts. There's also a nuance in the language that's important to note, and that has to do with these smaller systems. And what the amendment would do is it would indicate that the systems that are smaller, which really are accessory uses to other activities that might be happening on site, are going to be used primarily for the transmission of electricity on that site, but they could also transmit electricity off the site in a kind of a net metering capacity. That was important when we kind of did some research on this and realized that when there's investments for this size of batteries, the owners typically want to acquire the energy during non-peak demand periods so they can charge their batteries, pay less for the electricity, and then potentially sell some of it back during peak demand times. But again, the way that this structure of code is being set up is that these level 1 and level 2 batteries would primarily be designed to serve existing activities on site. They wouldn't be standalone batteries as a use. So that's the first part of amendment number 1. Amendment number 2 creates some consistency related to this concept by indicating that the less than 2 megawatt batteries that are primarily used on site would be considered accessory uses in all zones. Item number 3 indicates that solar energy systems or battery energy storage systems that are also primarily used on the site of an agricultural activity would be permitted as an accessory use. I would note that this particular section that's being amended allows for non-farming related activities like a farmer's home or outbuildings and other things to occur on 1 acre of a larger farm property. And the batteries would also have to fall within this particular criteria. So item number 4, if you recall, the original legislation has a section of development standards that apply to batteries that have to do with things like setbacks, things that are related to agreements with the fire district in the event of a meltdown and that sort of thing. This change would clarify that those development standards only kick in when the batteries are 2 megawatts or larger. So the smaller battery systems that are less than 2 megawatts wouldn't have to comply with any of those standards. They would still need to meet the NFPA standards for safety, but they wouldn't need to comply with kind of Pierce County's own thinking related to mitigation. Item number 5 has to do with some of the issues that we heard testimony on at the last hearing on this item related to the need for certain uses to have backup battery to use clean power versus diesel generators, for example, during like a power outage event. And so this language that says that you can't do a battery at a school or a nursing home or a hospital would just be deleted from the legislation and would go away. There was also testimony regarding the setback. The proposal had a 30-foot perimeter setback. That would be reduced to 10 feet, which is consistent with NAPA safety standards, again, related to the perimeter of a site. And then item number 7 creates some flexibility as it relates to screening. And what it would do is it would allow either landscaping to kind of soften the impact visually of new battery systems, or a site obscuring fence or a wall. And the underlying legislation already requires a fence or a wall. So this is a bit duplicative, but my perspective would be that most people would use something like this and maybe do some landscaping around the fence just to make it look a little bit better, but that would be on the applicant, wouldn't be a county requirement. And so that's what amendment number 1 does. It kind of gets into the weeds related to these batteries. Are there any questions about that?
Let's pause and see what we have. We'll start with Councilmember Denson.
Thank you, Mr. Krueger. I just want to return to section 3, which is the ag lands. And you said this, but I just want to make sure I understood you correctly, because I know there's concerns, particularly in our eastern Washington neighboring counties, about solar energy farms and Growth Management Act and protecting our ag land. So this is less of a concern about the battery energy systems, but it says here in this amendment, adding as a non-agriculture accessory use solar energy systems. But you said that it would have to be limited to an acre or less. Is that correct? Could you just say that again? Because my ears perked up at that.
Yeah, that's it. And so what that would do is that would make it clear that if a farmer wanted to have a solar energy array on their home or powering their Rivian, they would be able to do that. But it would have to be confined to that 1 acre of kind of non-farm activity development that is already permitted under the county code.
Okay, perfect.
So it wouldn't allow any expansion of non-farm related uses on a ARL property. You couldn't, under this exception, go out and build like a solar farm to collect energy and sell it back to the grid. That continues to be prohibited in Pierce County.
Perfect. I just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we're going to go to Councilmember Krueger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I just was curious on the 10-foot setback. What's the setback for like a shed from your property line?
Typically 3 feet.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Additional question? Oh, Councilmember Ayala.
Thank you. Quick question on item number 1. I know that the original legislation had 600 kilowatts listed as permissible outright, and then this changes things to have anything under 2 megawatts permissible outright.
That was actually done at a previous amendment, eliminated the 600 kilowatt hour standard and replaced it with 2 megawatts. And this kind of expands upon that based upon what we've learned regarding the size of these batteries and what's being produced and used in the industry. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was the original proposal that was received, was kind of a threshold at 600 kilowatt hours. The council changed that via an amendment at a previous hearing, and this would kind of increase the size once again.
Got it. Do we have any knowledge around, I know our fire marshal worked really hard on that original legislation. Do we have any knowledge around what concerns they had for that 600 to 2 megawatt area, or would we need to ask them directly?
I would encourage you to directly ask them, but I can tell you that the fire marshal is supportive of this proposal in terms of the sizes, has a better understanding related to what this would do. And the issue from the fire marshal's perspective really more has to do with compliance with NFPA. That's what they'll be looking at, and the WACs that relate to this particular type of battery facility and how to deal with the event of a meltdown, not whether you can allow a certain size of a battery in a particular location. That's really not what the fire marshal cares about as it relates to public safety. It's more of a zoning thing. And so that's what the 600 kilowatt standard did, was it controlled where these things could be set up. And that really wasn't a Ken Rice issue. It was more of a, I think, just a conservative perspective related to where this use could cause some conflicts in terms of compatibility. But I would also say the more staff and myself have learned, we've realized that these are pretty benign uses from a land use compatibility perspective.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're going to go to Councilmember Morrell. Oh, now we'll go to Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the questions my colleagues are talking about, and I appreciate Mr. Kruger's and Fire Marshal Ken Rice after our meeting that we had where we kicked the can for until tomorrow and brought in more of the industry to discuss kind of their concerns. And I appreciate there again, Mr. Kruger, listening to those concerns and coming up with amendment number 1. And we've kind of been on a tour to educate ourselves over the last couple weeks. And so we've had a couple of field trips to battery storage facilities that are being constructed and learned a lot about this technology and the advancements within the battery energy storage systems. My question is, based on Amendment 1, what type of permits would have to be issued by Pierce County on any of the different systems, whether it be level 1, 2, or 3?
If you don't mind, maybe we can talk through that with amendment number 2.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on amendment number 1? Not seeing any, so we'll go through amendment number 2 and then we'll come back to Councilmember Morrell's question.
And I'll try to address the council member's question as I talk about amendment number 2. Amendment number 2 is a long amendment because of all the use tables, and it in some ways controls the permitting process as it relates to battery energy storage systems from a zoning perspective. I think the council member was asking as part of the question what sort of permits might be required for these battery systems that are not from a zoning perspective, but from maybe a electrical permitting perspective or a building permit perspective, or maybe does the fire marshal have a permit? Currently, the fire marshal does not have a specific permit. There is some thinking regarding that and maybe a need for that at some point, having a particular fire permit for these battery systems, but right now there isn't one in code. Electrical permits would be required either via the permitting process through like Labor and Industries, which controls electrical permitting, or in some cases, like the local utility company might have a permit process, like Tacoma Utility, Tacoma Power might have a permit process. Then there's the building permit requirements, which could kick in dependent upon what's being built that are not related to the battery, but to support the battery itself. So Councilmember Morrell mentioned this utility scale battery facility we went to out near Sumner, which is crazy. It's this crazy project that I've never seen anything like it. It's literally concrete pilings 25 feet into the ground to create stability in the event of an earthquake, with 18-inch thick concrete pads for every battery that's just full of metal and super rigid, so that the batteries, when they move, aren't going to shake internally. The entire facility is basically paved with concrete to collect any water that might fall onto the site in the event of a meltdown. If they have to keep the battery cool, they want to be able to collect the water. There's concrete facilities around each substation because the way that the system works is the battery feeds substations that reduce the voltage that then leaves the site to augment the grid. Really sophisticated, but that sort of construction does require a building permit. And so they would have to comply with Pierce County's building standards related to that kind of construction. What I'm going to talk about in this amendment has to do with land use permitting and the hearings examiner. And so what amendment number 2 would do is it would clarify that battery energy storage systems that are less than 2 megawatts would be permitted outright in all zones. Every zone in the county, 2 megawatts and less. It's basically an accessory use, replacing generators as needed and that sort of thing. So it would include the 600 kilowatt hour facility that Councilwoman Ayala mentioned, all the way up to the 2 megawatt, which is kind of the cargo container size facility, fully permitted. Battery energy storage systems that are between 2 and 5 megawatts would be permitted outright in all commercial and industrial zones. And that includes rural commercial zones. So rural centers would be able to do battery energy storage facilities between 2 and 5 megawatts as outright permitted use. They would be allowed in park and recreation zones and public institutional zones to support governmental operations. Then when it comes to residential zones and rural residential zones, you would need a conditional use permit. For that kind of mid-size 2 to 5 megawatt, you'd have to go to the hearings examiner. So for example, if there was a school in a residential zone, which is a permitted activity, and they wanted to have a battery that was 3 megawatts to replace generators at their school, they would need to go to the hearings examiner for that because they're in a residential zone. It's a policy question for council to think through, but it was staff's best guess at what seemed reasonable. And then when we're talking about agricultural uses, resource lands, forest lands, those size of batteries would simply be prohibited. You wouldn't be able to do a 5 megawatt battery in an ARL zone, even in the 1 acre kind of set aside space that you can do other non-farm activities. Again, that's a 100% policy question for council, but it's staff's recommendation that you prohibit that use, at least at this time, until we learn more about when it comes to farm zones. Just for one reason, to eliminate any vulnerability in terms of an appeal. I'm sensitive when it comes to ARL lands and potential appeals, and so that's one of the reasons why we've decided, at least in the amendment, to prohibit this scale of battery within farmlands. And then finally, utility scale batteries, which in this proposal would be anything larger than 5 megawatts, would be permitted outright in all the industrial zones. So no additional permits. They would require a conditional use permit in all of the commercial zones, as well as rural zones. And the reason we included rural zones here is because batteries aren't really a GMA issue related to rural versus urban. So there's really no nexus to say that you have to prohibit these utility scale battery facilities, for example, supporting a substation that might be located out on the Key Peninsula. You still need to get a conditional use permit under this proposal because it's larger than the 5 megawatts, but it would be allowed through the CUP process. And then obviously that level of battery, so 5 megawatt utility scale, would be prohibited in the residential zones. You wouldn't be able to do it in a single family zone. It would also be prohibited in rural farm, ARL, and forest lands. So that's amendment number 2.
Okay, we're going to go back to Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess, and we've had this discussion, Mike, is if it goes through a conditional use permit and the hearing examiner hears it, what is he going to be able to rule on?
Well, for one thing, he'd be looking at the development standards that council is considering adopting related to this use. So the way that the structure of this proposal has been set up, if you're getting to the examiner, you're needing to comply with those development standards, and there's a few pages of those. And so that's what, among other things, the the examiner would be looking at. It would also be able to take a closer look at like neighborhood compatibility issues, depending upon the location that's chosen. So it would be more of a site-specific analysis based upon where the applicant wants to build one of these facilities. But this, again, is a council policy question, related to what you all think is the right thing to do. I would remind council that we've embedded into the ordinance a report back from the department in a year to let us know lessons learned as we see more and more of these facilities come online, so council can pivot if you believe, if you adopt this legislation and believe that it's either too restrictive or not restrictive enough. We'll have about a year's worth of data to about a year and a half worth of data to explore whether or not we're sizing things correctly here. And I don't pretend to have the right answers related to scale. So I think it's a good question, Councilmember Morell. Like, what is the examiner looking for? I'm not sure other than what the county would put into code in terms of kind of performance-based standards.
Yeah, I just think that, in learning more about this industry, is the siting of these are going to be real important for putting energy back on the grid again. And so I think you're going to see an ever expanding use of these battery storage systems within, and I mainly look at close to substations because that's where they got to get the power back to. And a lot of those substations are in residential areas. So
Sure.
I do have a concern about that. And there again, I know that there can be modifications made. And once the public gets used to having these facilities close by, then maybe some of the fear will be taken out. But I think in the future, you are going to have to make some policy changes as the industry moves forward towards getting our climate goals squared away. So my only question I did have, Mike, is pertaining to the education that the hearing examiner will have to will need other than just reading development, zoning requirements, is hopefully they won't be looking at the integration of the technology itself and a full understanding of what's going on, because, the technology, I can't, trying to understand what these guys were talking about is, mind-blowing to begin with. But anyway, that was my concern with the hearing examiner.
Sure, and just to follow up on that, the facility that we toured was in the Sumner industrial area. This proposal, as it relates to industrial lands, wouldn't require the hearings examiner's involvement. And that's, again, a policy question for council. What do you think? Do you want to have the examiner looking at all of these things in the county if they're utility scale? Staff's suggestion was not in the industrial areas, kind of to what I think Councilmember Morell was asking about, like the why. What is the examiner looking for when it comes to compatibility in these industrial lands related to supporting the grid? Kind of felt like it probably wasn't necessary, and so that's what we've suggested for industrial areas. But I will tell you that I've looked at other, I've spent a lot of time in the last week or two looking at this stuff. Some states preempt local government from regulating this activity. So, for example, I believe it's the state of Minnesota has state standards that say if it's less than 20 megawatts, local government, keep your hands off of it. They're permitted; they can go anywhere. The state is basically jumping into the fray. That we don't have that luxury here in Washington State at this point.
And then to follow up on rural designation, what was the thinking on limiting the use in rural areas?
Well, the thinking was that that in rural areas that the use will be permitted, but as it relates to the utility scale, they would be permitted through the conditional use permit. And the thinking there was just being cautious related to this activity and, not knowing what we don't know as it relates to these facilities, and trying to kind of, I don't know, I want to use the word protect, but just cautiously allow utility scale in areas that would create a footprint that may be inconsistent with the general land use pattern or activities outside of the UGA. So taking that into consideration, said, maybe the hearings examiner should be in the mix, at least initially, if there are proposals to do utility scale in rural lands versus resource lands, right? So that's something else for council to think through. But our suggestion here is that on resource lands, utility scale should be just simply prohibited for now. And that means forest lands in the foothills. It means agricultural lands in the valleys. This utility scale battery storage wouldn't be permitted at all.
So let's say,
That's your decision to make.
okay, let's say for the community of Greenwater,
Okay?
who is susceptible to energy problems every year with the inability to keep power on, especially during the winter.
Right.
Would it be permitted?
So the way that Greenwater is structured is that up to 5 megawatts, they'd be allowed as an outright permitted use. No hearings examiner. Once you get above 5 megawatts, they'd have to get a conditional use permit.
Okay. And that would be the same for, I was thinking Crystal Mountain.
Probably. Let me confirm that.
Okay.
Yeah, let me confirm that. But I suspect that's what we've done here with Crystal Mountain. They're a little bit unique up at Crystal Mountain because they're in this master planned resort status, which means there's like a special PUD that deals with Crystal Mountain, and there's state law that deals with master planned resorts. The hearings examiner is generally involved with anything that happens up at Crystal Mountain that deviates from their adopted master plan. And so I'm going to have to do a little research on that. But my suspicion is the way that I've structured this thing, if it's less than 5 megawatts, it would just be like permitted. If it's more than 5 megawatts, instead of a real conditional use permit, you're amending the PUD, would be my suspicion on how the department would interpret the regulations that address what goes on at Crystal.
Okay. Okay. The question that I asked pertaining to Greenwater is because they're currently looking for grants for, to get a diesel generator to power their facilities up there. And if they had an option to go this route, I just want to make sure they have an option to do that.
They certainly have the option to do it. It's under 5 megawatts, they would be just permitted to go forward, and if it was larger than that, in Greenwater, it's a conditional use permit.
Okay. And by permitted outright, you mean they would still have to get a building permit?
Most likely, right? Because what's the battery going to sit on? And it's the thing that it's sitting on that requires the permit, not the battery.
Correct, because as we learn, there are no structures on these sites. In other words, no buildings. It's just all concrete pads.
Right.
And everything is run remotely through this whatever technology they have. But I'm just want to make sure that, that the permit process is streamlined to the point where it doesn't get hung up that, they've got to have 4 number 5 rebar in it, then, number 7 rebar. I just want to make sure that we're not getting into a situation where you have someone at Public Works trying to design a footing that in the company like Gridwork, where they build all over the nation, they already know what they need to build. So
Yeah.
I just don't want to get into those kind of discussions.
I mean, that's international building code stuff, and it is what it is
Okay.
to support the load.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're going to go to Councilmember Krueger.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really know what to ask anymore. The deeper I go in this, the more confusing it gets, or the more information that comes up. I'm trying to compare in general battery backup or the generators like a Generac generator that people have in their homes. So an equivalent would be like a Tesla charger in a house. Would that be able to run a house as well? So you wouldn't need a generator. Would that be a substitute?
I can talk a little bit about it. So the Tesla home batteries are 13.5 kilowatt hour batteries, and they can charge a Tesla car. They can also provide battery storage backup for your home in the event of an outage, but it's 13.5 kilowatts. You can string, I believe, 5 of those together, which is unusual, but that is as many as that can be strung together. I believe Ken Rice told me that once you get to 80 kilowatts, then you're no longer permitted to do those in a residential dwelling unit, and that's pursuant to WAC. So it's not a county standard, it's the state standard related to these batteries. I could see something like that happening in a farming location, for example, at Wilcox, where the chickens are, if the power goes out, chickens die. So they do batteries as instead of using diesel generators, right? And so they could string 5 of those things together in a particular building to keep the chickens alive.
Do you know how long that would power up? Because these batteries don't generate power; they
feed it.
Expel it.
So it depends. It all depends. It depends on what they're using. And so in my example, they probably don't care about lights as much as they do with heat. And so they're going to structure their battery to feed into whatever heating system that they're needing to keep the air above whatever the minimum temperature that the chickens need, and maybe have a little bit of lighting that's going on in the buildings. But this is sophisticated stuff where these people that are installing these things 100% know what they're doing, and they're doing it intentionally, and they're doing it so that they can keep the power on during different types of activities until you start getting into the utility scale, where they're building these things at substations to keep the energy output consistent and eliminate peaks and valleys, and also start making some money because they're able to purchase the power less expensively off peak demand times and then sell it back, in the afternoon, or if we get a hot day, people start throwing their air conditioners on, they can sell it back on those days and make some money.
Right, but I have more people that won't run their air because they can't afford it. So in a cold snap, how do these commercial batteries, are they affected, or do we know, or do you know?
I don't know enough about it to answer that question.
Okay.
But I do know that they're using these batteries in the Midwest extensively, and it's colder than, Northeast. So the technology works compared to our milder winters here on the west side. I don't believe it's an issue.
So I just was wondering how much research was done on that which has already happened, because I think in terms of how computers mainframes would take up a whole building, and now they're in a laptop.
Yeah.
And how we progressed from the 45 to the LP to the cassette to the VHS, et cetera.
Same thing's happening here. It's happening very quickly. They're moving away from lithium batteries to sodium batteries, which are much more stable and less expensive and smaller. And so the technology is just moving super quick.
But something like this, you can't back up and regroup once it gets placed, because that's pretty a takeover of the land with these kinds of systems. So if we go to the SMRs, which I don't think is that far away, where you have such a smaller unit that doesn't take near the land base, and here we have all these things that are littered across the plains.
The utility scale facility that Councilmember Morell and I toured, it's a 20-year deal, so that they have contractual agreements with Puget Sound Energy for 20 years, and during that time, the batteries themselves will start to erode in terms of the amount of electricity they can hold. They have vacant, lack of a better term, pads on this site where they can put new facilities onto a pad. So when the batteries degrade, they can keep that particular amount of power flowing up to that 20-year contractual arrangement they have. But I have no doubt that in 20 years, these things are going to really shrink, and they're probably going to be considered just like normal business activities, and it's just and cheaper, much less expensive.
Do you know if there's anything in place so if at the end of maybe 15 years of the 20-year contract and things aren't going well and the company picks up and leaves and there's in here are all this battery farm sitting out there, what happens then? Is there any plan in place for that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on committee amendment or council amendment number 2? Okay, we'll go to council amendment number 3.
Thank you, Chair. Council Amendment number 3 would prohibit battery energy storage systems in volcanic hazard areas and shoreline areas in the Upper Nisqually Community Plan territory.
Thank you. This one's simple. Any questions on this one? Not seeing any, so we'll look at number 4.
The last amendment, Council Amendment 4, is a technical amendment, and it is simply updating the dates of the council meeting for tomorrow, and it would change the effective date to September 1st.
Okay. Questions on this one? Any other questions on this piece of legislation as it stands? And we'll do some more thinking and talking tomorrow. Okay, not seeing any. So I think I do want to just flag this one and potentially the next one, which we also have amendments on. There's conversations around potentially needing more time, both from either department staff or from council members. There's been questions raised on both of these. So this was 526 S2 and 534, the child endangerment, which we'll talk about in a second when we look at some amendments. And so options we have as a council, because they have been scheduled for final action, are to take final action and pass legislation. That's always our option and usually our normal course of business. The second one is to postpone it and postpone it indefinitely or postpone it with an intent of it coming back. But when you postpone a bill per our county, either code or charter, I don't remember which, says that if we don't do anything with that legislation in 2 years, it just dies. But then there's kind of 2 years. I think there's a lot of interest from everyone at this dais to do something with both of these pieces of legislation in less than 2 years. The third one is to continue it to a future council meeting. And the fourth is to send it back to committee. And just flagging right now, one of the things that I think potentially makes the most sense would be to send it back to committees, but this would be something we would do during our open public meeting tomorrow. But I just wanted to flag it for all 7 of us so that we have time to think about impacts if there's stakeholdering. I just know that we have all learned a lot about battery energy storage systems and continue to learn more. And I think that there's wanting to do this right, but also do it quickly. And those two things, I think if we just had a little bit more time, it might make a lot of sense. So, but again, those are options. So final action, postponing, continuing, and then sending back to committee are really the 4 options. And just wanted to say that out loud. We're going to go to Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you laying out kind of what we can or cannot do. And this may be a procedural question. If we postpone indefinitely, do we have to re-advertise, bringing it back, and does it need to go through the regular process?
So yes, council member, if the council took action to postpone the proposal indefinitely, then an action in the future would be necessary to schedule and assign a new final hearing date on
Okay.
it.
But to continue it, we wouldn't.
You could continue to a
Date.
certain, that's an option, or as the chair noted, the council could refer this item or either of the proposals back to committee so that they can be further perfected. And then once committee had completed its work, there would be a scheduling action necessary to set a final hearing date for the council.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I would hope that if there are concerns on either one of these, that they're discussed at study session and not just, I don't understand, so I want to postpone it. Some of these, you know, and to the battery storage systems, you know, I don't know what else we can do to clarify or make someone understand on that. And like I say, I don't have a problem continuing or whatever we want to do, but not just for the fact that I don't understand what's going on. If you have definite concerns about it, it should be talked about and not just, I just think we need to postpone it. So that would be my comments pertaining to that. And I'm just speaking to the battery storage systems, energy storage systems ordinance. So,
Thank you. Additional comments or questions? Otherwise, Ms. Kelly, we're going to take a look at O 2026-534.
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Andrea Kelly, Council staff. You do have 2 amendments available today, and I believe those have both been distributed. Thank you so much, Ms. Ms. Price. This is in regard to Proposal O 2026-534, an ordinance amending Chapter 9.57 of the Pierce County Code, endangerment with a controlled substance. So the proposal changed the applicability of that chapter, changing it from dependent persons and children to any persons. Amendment number 1, coming from Councilmember Denson, rolls that application back to dependent persons and children. This was after discussion with the prosecutor's office. As discussed at the Public Safety Committee, there was some concern about the broad application, and Prosecutor Rob Nett was here and spoke about whether the application for people who have people with agency and people without agency, that the intent was from the prosecutor's office was to protect people without agency, children, dependent adults who could not remove themselves from a situation that was potentially harmful. And the prosecutor also spoke of, you know, from her perspective, it would be difficult to prosecute a case in which someone with agency maybe had some incidental contact but didn't have any sort of lasting impacts necessarily, or any sort of evidence that the prosecutor's office could use in a criminal matter. These cases in which it has been charged since the legislation passed in 2024, the victim parties on the case have been children, and they have had positive urinalysis tests for controlled substance. So in discussion with the prosecutor's office and at the Public Safety Committee, there was discussion about creating a threshold of harm, creating a level, you know, for persons with agency, the discussion about changing the definitions under ingests or, you know, contact or absorption. The prosecutor's office expressed some concern. Expressed some concern in diminishing that definition. They wanted that broad protection there for people without agency. And also what was discussed and what is reflected in changing the application is that persons with agency, and if they are caused harm by exposure to a controlled substance, that could be charged under state statute. RCW 9A 36050 does have a threshold of harm. It doesn't specifically call out a controlled substance, but the definition there is a person is guilty of reckless endangerment when he or she recklessly engages in conduct not amounting to drive-by shooting, but that creates a substantial risk of death or physical injury to another person. And that is also a gross misdemeanor, which is the same classification as the code, the Pierce County Code. So, so the intent of having a tool or having a charge available for persons with agency who are caused harm due to exposure to a controlled substance is in state statute. And that is a summary of that amendment.
Any questions on amendment number 1? Okay, we'll look at amendment number 2.
Certainly. So amendment number 2 adds language to the title, including a reporting requirement, adds a recital to the proposal, and then modernizes language in the exhibit. So adding to the title, this amendment requests that the prosecuting attorney's office provide a report on case statistics for cases which are filed under Chapter 9.57. The recital that is added says, whereas research shows that incarceration can actually increase the likelihood of future crimes by traumatizing people before releasing them back to their communities, and that no barrier access to treatment and resources is far more effective in in addressing substance use disorder, and that oftentimes people are incarcerated due to behavior rooted in poverty, unstable housing, mental illness, and substance use, which are outcomes of insufficient investments in community health. And then the section, or no, item number 3 on that amendment adds a section requesting that the prosecuting attorney's office collect data. This was also discussed in public safety in regard to how is this going to be monitored to ensure that people charged are receiving opportunities for treatment, and that it's not having a disproportionate impact on any certain population. This has been discussed with the prosecutor's office as well, and they did not express any concerns in being able to provide this data. And then the last item is updating language, changing his or her to their.
Thank you. Any questions on this amendment? Not seeing any. Thank you, Ms. Kelly. Mr. Lane, did you, to speak kind of to Councilmember Morell's request around BES and hearing things, do you want to share your thoughts? It's one of the reasons we had a conversation, and since he explicitly asked, he wants to hear, and you're in the room.
Good afternoon, John Lane, Senior Counsel with the Exec's Office. I understand that it is unusual to sort of be at this stage in the process and to have had the hearing and to recommend sort of slowing down and kind of going backwards. But based on what occurred, I guess 2 weeks ago at the hearing on the battery energy storage system, where the proposal that originally put forth had 100 kilowatt hours and 600 kilowatt hours, and then moved to the 2 kilowatt hours. And there were a lot of questions that were raised at that time as to exactly kind of what was occurring on sort of sensitive use places with schools and daycares and other areas. And I know a lot of work has gone on since then, and appreciate all of the work that the council has done and council staff. But it does seem, as was stated, that we are at quite a different situation from that hearing based on these amendments here, and have had some pretty big moves. And there were several policy questions that were raised today in the discussion. And so it would be our recommendation that this actually gets return back to committee and more of those discussions take place, looking at what are the impacts of 3 kilowatt and 5 kilowatt, what are the impacts in agricultural lands, what are potentially some of the impacts in the residential areas by having permit only up to that 2 kilowatt. There may be some consistent use issues that occur. So we are fully supportive of battery energy storage systems, see it as the future and an important piece, and do not want to significantly delay this. But we would recommend that there's time for more conversation with stakeholders and more stakeholder work that goes into this on all sides. And so that would be kind of why we spoke earlier about an interest in returning back to committee for further consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Are there questions for Mr. Lane? Thought there might be. Councilmember Morrell?
Yeah, Mr. Lane, you've been involved in the meetings that have happened over the last couple weeks, mainly the one that Fire Marshal Ken Rice put together.
I was not at the stakeholder meeting that occurred last week with the Fire Marshal, PPW, and some of the industry representatives, but I was briefed on that meeting.
Okay, did PPW have anybody there?
My understanding, yes, they did.
They did?
Yes.
Okay, and it seemed like out of the outcome of that meeting, everyone kind of had a better understanding of what the best program was and wasn't. I know that it is an education process that needs to happen, but it's my understanding that there's several proposals that are being held up right now for best systems, waiting to see what the outcome of this legislation is. And, I'm just kind of a little concerned that now you want to educate yourself on the systems where you've had opportunities to do that. And have you toured the Sumner site?
I have not.
And that's been in the process for 4 years now. And same thing with Snohomish County. They have their ordinances have been passed and they're currently in construction. Have you looked at any of the other counties that have passed this legislation? And King County has it, to try to educate yourself on what's going on?
My understanding is Planning Public Works has looked at the other counties and has looked at the legislation that they have put forth. I think what I'm saying is we think that there have been significant questions raised in the last week or two about this proposal, and we're not trying to delay any of these larger commercial industrial battery energy storage systems, but I think that we also want to make sure that we get it right. And based on the change in information that occurred at the original hearing to kind of where we're at now, clearly we could have done more work earlier on. And we've been scrambling in the last week or two to answer some of those questions that were raised by the industry. Obviously, there needed to be some more stakeholdering. And so as we move forward in responding to those stakeholders, I think it's incumbent that we make sure that we're not missing other stakeholders that might have, an interest in how this legislation is evolving.
Okay, because it was my understanding, based on the comments that were made, it was the fact that some of the stakeholders in the industry were left out of the considerations on the amendment that came forward from the executive. And, in amendment number 1, we've kind of clarified that, and amendment number 2, to get their concerns. So who are you What other stakeholders are you looking for input?
Well, I think that, yes, the stakeholders that came forward at the last hearing, we needed to have better coordination with them earlier to understand their position. I feel like the amendments have moved in that direction, but I do feel like other individuals, and stakeholders that came forward could use the time to look at what these potential amendments might be as well.
So is it more that the department wants to take a look at the amendments versus stakeholders? I guess that's what I can't figure out, because I thought that putting amendment number 1 and amendment number 2 handled all the questions that came up, and the meeting that Fire Marshal Ken Rice had in bringing all those concerned stakeholders together. This answered all their questions. So who else is out there that we don't know about that may have comments about this? I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out. What other stakeholders do you need to bring into this group to make comments on this ordinance?
I don't believe other individuals have seen where these amendments are. They're being put forward today. And so I think that having the conversation and making sure that we completely understand all the implications of what these amendments do, I think it would be a useful time and process to have that discussion at committee.
I don't have a problem with delaying it if that's what you want to do. But remember, this is your ordinance that you sent down that we just perfected because you weren't up to industry standards on this technology. And so I'm just kind of curious to see, and like I say, I don't have a problem if you guys want to take it back, and we'll explain to everyone why you're doing it. But I just don't, I guess I'm a little confused as why you want to pull it back all of a sudden. After you sent it to us, we made the changes, which the legislative body can make changes. And now you're saying, whoa, 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 hold it. We don't understand why you're changing our ordinance. So I guess that's where I'm confused on why you want to do that. Because like I say, as Mr. Kruger said, we'll pass the ordinance, we'll correct any future problems that may come up with, and I've said this over and over again, there's no perfect legislation. And the industry wants it, the utilities need it, and I just don't understand why you want to kick the can just to take a look and make sure we've included every stakeholder, which I thought we dealt with all the questions that arose last time.
Yeah, I think you left out a third, like the executive's office wants this as well. So I understand.
I'm sorry.
The executive's office wants this legislation as well. So I just want to be clear, we are fully supportive of this legislation and battery energy storage systems, and are in alignment with industry and utilities that want and need this. And we believe that this is an important move forward, and it's something that's in the best interest of Pierce County. And we also understand that we missed the mark at the first hearing, and take responsibility for that. And we're taking actions to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future. But we do feel like there's a significant change from what happened, what was presented at the first hearing and where we're at now. And it would behoove us all to take a little step back and have a little more conversation and make sure we all expressly know exactly what we're doing here. And we're willing to roll up our sleeves and be invested and move this as soon as possible.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lane. I'm not seeing any lights. I appreciate the comments in a little bit.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments on items on the agenda? Not seeing any, so we will talk about the grants that are actually on the agenda. I didn't skip you, Mr. Boki.
Thank you very much. The first grant is Youth Homelessness System Improvement, YHSI. It's from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. It is HUD will make awards to selected communities to support them in establishing and implementing a response system for youth homelessness or for improving their existing response system. Human Services, Homeless Services is collaborating with other communities to functional zero communities to strengthen the response system statewide to prevent and end youth homelessness. It is a $1 million request. It is a competitive grant, I would note. And we have both Emil Floresca and Devin Isaacson to answer your questions.
Thank you. Are there questions on this particular grant? Not seeing any, then we'll move on to the second one.
The next one is from Planning and Public Works, Office of the County Engineer. It is the local bridge program from the Washington State Department of Transportation. The WashDOT Federal Local Bridge Program provides funding for eligible local bridge improvement projects. This application requests funding to rehabilitate the bridge decks of bridges 8183A and 23164B. So you're all well aware of both those bridges. And the project will address documented deck deterioration, improved bridge safety and serviceability, and extend the useful life of these critical transportation assets. The request is for $1,653,000. And of course, I was only joking. There's two maps in there. The first bridge location is on the Alder Cutoff Road south of the town of Eatonville. And the other location is on 8th Avenue South, just off State Route 507, and it's over the railroad tracks. We have won these awards in the past. I went back and looked, and so we have been fairly successful, not in the most recent past, but years ago. In the first part of this decade, we've done a number of bridge projects through this program. And with that, I believe Ms. Becca Osterhaus is here to answer your questions.
Okay. Any questions on the bridge grant? Not seeing any. So any objections to having these two items on our agenda without the little tag that says to review? Okay. So we'll have them on the consent agenda tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Boki. Okay, that brings us to committee agendas. Mr. Taylor, to walk us through.
All right, thank you. So I will review your amended meeting schedule for August 3rd through the 7th. This morning at 10 a.m., the council had its regular Rules and Operations Committee meeting. I wish to note that the committee forwarded two proposals out to the council with due pass recommendations. Those proposals are proposal number O-2026-543. This is a proposal granting a non-exclusive franchise to the Citizens Water Association. And then the second proposal was proposal number O-2026-545. This is an ordinance that amends Chapter 4.36 of the Pierce County Code, claims and actions by and against the county. Of course, you are in your regular 11 a.m. Monday study session currently, so I won't cover those items. This afternoon, your regular Community Development and Environment Committee meeting at 1:30 p.m. has been canceled. Tomorrow, Tuesday, August the 4th, there is the regular Health and Human Services Committee meeting at 9:30 a.m. In addition to regular business on that agenda, there is a update from the Tacoma Rescue Mission on the Good Neighbor Village and Men's Shelter expansion. That'll be provided by the Tacoma Rescue Mission, Duke Paulson, Executive Director. Also on the HHS Committee agenda for tomorrow is an update from the Low Income Housing Institute. That update concerns the Spanaway Tiny Home Village, the Oasis Inn, and the Kingfisher Village. That update will be provided by the Low Income Housing Institute. Tomorrow at noon, you've got your regular Tuesday study session with just regular items of business noted, nothing to highlight of particular note. I covered your 3 o'clock council meeting earlier and study session. Wednesday, August the 5th, you do have a special meeting. That is a special meeting of the Pierce County Council in the Committee of the Whole. There is one item to note on that agenda, and that is a Juvenile Justice Task Force report overview and next steps panel discussion. The executive will provide some introductory remarks. There will be a panel supporting that discussion, including Mr. Lane from the executive's office, Carl Emlig, the Director of Facilities Management, and then the Honorable Joseph Evans from the Superior Court, and then Chris Gaddis, Court Executive Officer for the Superior Court. So those are your items for this week's meeting schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions on the meeting schedule? Not seeing any. Then we'll move on to administrative items. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Just a few items to note. Last week in study session, the council discussed the need to fill 2 vacancies on the town council for South Prairie. The legislation to support that has been drafted and is in the midst of the review process. So we'll move the council office with support, obviously, from the council. We'll move on that quickly. I did put out a message to the office last week. The office has updated its intranet page, and so if you've had an opportunity to look at that or you haven't, that's fine as well, but we would like any feedback that you might have regarding the redesign of the intranet page. I know that Mr. Dominique has spoken previously to an update to the internet page, the public-facing page. That page has been revised. We will be putting out a survey soon to solicit feedback from members regarding their priorities for the council's webpage. Lastly, we continue to review the many applications received for the 2 positions. We have completed the review of the applications for the operations assistant position. We're getting close to finalizing the review of the applications for the public information specialist position. In total, 200 applications for those 2 positions, so a lot of information to sift through. And those are the updates that I have for you today.
Thank you. Appreciate the overview. Are there any questions for Mr. Taylor? Not seeing any. Is there any other business before the council and study session or comments from colleagues? Not seeing any. Seeing no other business before us, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.